The city of Melbourne, Australia is home to a rather varied railway network, not to mention a world-famous tram system to boot. I spent 5 days in the city in June 2024, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a success. In both directions, the aircraft in which we travelled was a Boeing 777-300ER, and even though Air New Zealand wasn't the cheapest option, still chose to fly with them out of personal preference. Their suburban rail network runs on 1600mm broad gauge track, and it's electrified at 1500 volts direct current. 4 types of electric multiple units run on the network, namely the Commuter, Siemens Nexus, Alstom Extrapolis 100, and High Capacity Metro Train, or HCMT for short. The city has had electric multiple units running suburban services since 1919, and a few examples of the original EMUs, namely the Tate and swing door types, have been preserved, as is the case with the later Hitachi and Harris units. The metro lines come in from the suburbs and meet at the iconic Flinders Street station, while also connecting with V-Line regional trains at Southern Cross. Quite frankly, I think Southern Cross is rather ugly, with its large roof and terrible lighting, not to mention all the noise from the stationary Velocity and Sprinter diesel multiple units. Besides Flinders Street and Southern Cross, suburban trains also use a short underground section in central Melbourne that's known as the City Loop. This section first opened in 1981, and even though its layout/operation can be very confusing, Taitset did a good job at explaining the City Loop, so I recommend watching his video on the topic. And indeed, his videos are generally a very good source of information on Melbourne's railway and tram networks as a whole. I should also mention that, in addition to the broader gauge tracks, the city also has some 1435mm standard gauge lines used by freight and interstate passenger trains, and the trams use standard gauge too. As someone who lives in a country that only uses 1067mm or 3-foot 6-inch gauge on its mainline railways, I found the frequent use of 2 different track gauges in Melbourne to be quite confusing. Upon arrival at Southern Cross, after catching the Skybus down from Tullamarine Airport, the first things I filmed were some E-Class trams at the intersection of Burke and Spencer Streets. This intersection is used by routes 86 and 96, which run from Harbour City Docklands to Bundoora RMIT and East Brunswick to St Kilda respectively. Route 96 is also the only line on which you'll find the rare C2 class trams. Next, I ended up back in the station and found Alstom refurbished Commuter number 666M, aka the Devil Commuter, sitting on platform 11. That unit soon left, and I waited for a Craigieburn service to take me to Moonee Ponds, as that was the closest station to our hotel. This service was formed by a pair of EDI Commuter units. As a brief-ish aside, the Comenge units are the oldest EMUs in Melbourne's current fleet, as they were built between 1981 and 1988, and the Comenge name comes from Commonwealth Engineering, the company that built these units. The surviving units now have two distinctly different cab fronts, depending on which company refurbished them in the early 2000s. Units under Connex were done by Alstom, while units under M-Train were done by EDI Rail. And for context, Connex and M-Train were two separate private companies that each ran their own half of the network at the time, and the current Metro Trains operator didn't exist until 2009. I also noticed vastly different internal screens on each Comenge variant. The Alstom ones had this rather modern design that wouldn't look out of place on the HCMT, while the EDI ones had a simple screen with orange text scrolling across. Curiously, the Alstom Comenge screens were at each end of the coach, while the EDI Comenge screens were just in the middle. After going anti-clockwise round the city loop, we went out past the flour mill at Kensington and on up the Craigieburn line. Unfortunately, nothing was in the sidings this time. There was still some time to kill before checking into the hotel, so I went to a vantage point just south of the level crossing and filmed some more Comenge units there. While their new horns are not as distinctive as the classic RVB3 chime, I still think they're perfectly fine. After checking into the hotel, I went back to the city aboard this Alstom Comenge, and spotted plenty of V-Line stock in the sidings outside Southern Cross. If anyone knows what type of wagon this is, please leave a comment below. I also photographed this particular Sprinter rail car because she has the same number as KiwiRail's DFT 7008, or rather, what was KiwiRail's DFT 7008, as she was shipped off to South Africa in April 2024. And this was the view out of the window as we went along the viaduct from Southern Cross to Flinders Street. As one would expect, Flinders Street was very busy in the Thursday afternoon peak period. Trains constantly came and went while I tried to sort out a plan of action. Originally, I was thinking of going out to Riversdale and Alamein, but it didn't work out that way. At one point, one of the ubiquitous Velocity DMUs showed up on a service to Traralgon. After seeing this unit, we went out to North Melbourne aboard a Siemens Nexus. Next, I tried filming trains at the nearby railfan viewing platform. And at this point in the afternoon, there were an awful lot of Velocity units coming and going on services to or from Geelong, Wyndham Vale, Melton, and other destinations that I've probably forgotten. I boarded another Siemens Nexus unit for a ride out to Newport, thinking I would wait and see the Overland passenger train there. Although that plan ended up being changed, I did manage to film 2 trains at Newport station, even if they were just the regular suburban ones. Newport Station is served by trains going to Williamstown and Werribee, although some of the Werribee line services go via Altona and terminate at Laverton. The Werribee and Williamstown lines also do through running with the Frankston line, for whatever reason. Upon arrival back at Southern Cross, I was pleasantly surprised to find one of V-Line's N-Class diesel locomotives sitting at platform 15. I was lucky to see the ends multiple times throughout the trip, especially since locomotive hauled services are becoming less and less common with the ongoing construction of the Velocity DMUs. Meanwhile, over on platform 2, NR82 had just arrived with a passenger service from Adelaide. The NRs are some of my favourite Australian diesel locomotives, and this was the first time I ever saw one in person. 120 examples of this class were built by A. Gunainen and Company between 1996 and 1998, but 3 of them have since been written off and scrapped following nasty crashes. As for the Overland itself, this service runs twice a week in each direction from Adelaide Parklands Terminal to Melbourne Southern Cross, but sadly, it's now a far cry from the overnight sleeper train it once was. Services towards Melbourne run on Thursdays and Sundays, while services to Adelaide run on Fridays and Mondays. At 6:51 PM, one of the XPT sets from NSW Trainlink, at least I think that's the operator's name, arrived at platform 1 on a service from Sydney. As you'll see from the footage, the XPT was famously based on the British Rail Class 43 HST.
B9 customers, the 6:30 Sydney service will be arriving shortly at platform 1. The 6:30 Sydney service will be arriving shortly at
At this point, I decided that I had seen enough activity on Melbourne's railways for one day, so I went back to Moonee Ponds via another transfer at Flinders Street.